My daughter-in-law threw my birthday gift into the garbage in front of 30 guests and laughed while she did it. Not a nervous laugh. Not an embarrassed one. A proud laugh. The kind that says, I just won. It was Claire's 35th birthday party, hosted in the house my late husband and I paid off 20 years ago. The house I still legally own. The house she decorates like it belongs to her Pinterest board. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft jazz floated through the speakers. Caterers moved in pressed black uniforms. Everything was polished, curated, expensive. And then there was me, standing near the fireplace in a soft beige cardigan, holding a small navy velvet box in both hands. I had wrapped it myself. Claire, I said gently when she began opening gifts. This one's from me. She took it with 2 fingers. 2 fingers. Like it might stain her manicure. Oh, she smiled tightly. You didn't have to. But she didn't mean it. Everyone was watching. Her Pilates friends. Daniel's business partners. 2 couples from the country club. Even our neighbor Susan, who never misses an opportunity to observe drama from a safe distance. Claire slowly removed the paper. Then she looked at the box. Her smile changed. It turned sharp. Oh my God, she laughed. It's so tiny. A few guests chuckled. I felt my chest tighten, but I stayed calm. At 72, you learn how to breathe through humiliation. Go ahead, I said softly. Open it. She flipped the box open. She barely looked inside. Barely. Then she snapped it shut. I mean, she turned to her friends. Is this serious? My ears started ringing. Inside that tiny box was a 1-carat antique diamond ring. Old European cut. Platinum setting. My mother's heirloom. I had it resized for her. Had it professionally cleaned. I even included the appraisal in a sealed envelope underneath. But she didn't see it. She saw small packaging. And that was enough for her. Claire walked toward the kitchen island, still holding the box. Margaret, she said loudly enough for the room to hear. This is sweet, but it's really not my style. Before I could respond, she dropped it into the trash, right on top of crumpled napkins and cake frosting, and laughed. Oops. The room went quiet in that suffocating, awkward way people do when they're witnessing something ugly but don't want to get involved. Daniel stepped forward. Claire, maybe you should. It's fine, she cut him off, waving her champagne glass. We're decluttering this year anyway. No more random little things. Random little things. That's what she called my gift. That's what she called something that belonged to my mother. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My hands were shaking, but not from age. From shame. From being dismissed like an old receipt someone didn't need anymore. Oh honey, one of her friends whispered. That was brutal. Claire just shrugged. She means well. Means well. Like I was some confused elderly woman who wandered into the wrong store and bought something meaningless. I stood there, every eye sliding toward me and then quickly away. And in that moment I understood something very clearly. She didn't think I mattered. Not really. To Claire, I was background noise. The aging mother-in-law who lived quietly upstairs. The widow with outdated taste. The sentimental old woman clinging to tiny things. Tiny box. Tiny gift. Tiny importance. I forced a smile. Well, I said calmly. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. She air-kissed my cheek. Thanks for understanding, Margaret. Not Mom. Never Mom. I walked toward the hallway bathroom before my tears could betray me. Locked the door. Gripped the sink. I stared at my reflection. 72 years old. Silver hair. Steady eyes. And beneath the hurt, something else was forming. Not weakness. Not defeat. Resolve. Because here's what Claire didn't know. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It was part of a larger plan. A test, actually. And she had just failed it publicly. I had been considering something important for months. Something involving my will. Something involving the house. Something involving who inherits what. Claire had just made my decision very easy. I dabbed my lipstick. Smoothed my cardigan. And I walked back into that party like a woman who had just learned exactly who her enemy was. I did not retrieve the ring from the trash. I left it there. Because sometimes the best revenge begins when you let someone believe they threw away something worthless. By the end of that night, the guests would forget the cake. They would forget the music. But they would remember one thing: Claire laughing while she humiliated her elderly mother-in-law. And I promise you this: she will one day stand in a room full of people and feel exactly what I felt. But when it happens, it will be intentional. And it will be unforgettable. I went back for the ring the next morning. Not because I needed the diamond. Not because of the money. And certainly not because I wanted to give it back to her. I went back because I refused to let something that belonged to my mother rot under coffee grounds and cake frosting. The house was quiet when I came downstairs. Claire and Daniel were still asleep. The catering trays had been picked up, the glasses washed, the evidence of celebration erased. But I could still feel it in the air, that lingering echo of laughter. Her laughter. The kitchen trash can was still half full. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. 72 years old, digging through garbage at 8 in the morning. If anyone had told me 10 years ago this is where I would be, I would have laughed myself. But life has a way of revealing people when you least expect it. I rolled up my sleeves. The velvet box was near the bottom. Frosting smeared along the edge. A coffee filter stuck to the side. I picked it up carefully, wiped it clean with a paper towel, and opened it. The diamond caught the morning light instantly. Brilliant. Clear. Undamaged. Unlike my pride. Underneath the cushion lining was still the sealed appraisal envelope. Untouched. She never even noticed it. That told me everything. Claire didn't reject the gift because it lacked value. She rejected it because she believed it lacked status. To her, if something doesn't announce its worth loudly, it must not have any. I cleaned the ring thoroughly and placed it back in the box. Then I sat at the kitchen island and poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply thought. You see, humiliation changes you in two possible ways. It either shrinks you, or it clarifies you. And Claire had just clarified something very important. For months, I had been debating whether to transfer partial ownership of this house to Daniel. My lawyer had even drafted preliminary paperwork. I had been thinking about simplifying things. Preparing for the future. Being responsible. Being kind. But kindness only works when it's respected. Around 9:30, Claire came downstairs in silk pajamas, scrolling through her phone. She didn't notice me at first. "Morning," she said casually when she saw me. "Rough night cleaning up." "I imagine," I replied calmly. She poured herself a green juice from the fridge and leaned against the counter. "Listen, about the gift. I hope you didn't take that personally. I just prefer minimal things. You know me. Minimal things." I almost smiled. "Of course," I said evenly. "I understand completely." She seemed relieved by that. That's the thing about people like Claire. They don't expect resistance. They expect compliance wrapped in politeness. "Well, good," she said. "I just didn't want any awkwardness." Awkwardness. Not cruelty. Not disrespect. Just awkwardness. "I appreciate you clearing that up," I said. And I meant it. Because now I knew exactly who she was. Later that afternoon, I drove to my attorney's office. Not to complain. Not to cry. To revise. I sat across from Mr. Lawson. A quiet man in his 60s who has handled my affairs since my husband passed. "I need to update my estate plan," I told him. He adjusted his glasses. "Of course. What changes would you like to make?" I folded my hands on the desk. "I want to ensure that the house, my investment accounts, and all heirloom jewelry are placed in a trust." "That can certainly be arranged." "Who will be the beneficiary?" I didn't hesitate. "My granddaughter, Emily." "Not Daniel. Not Claire. Emily. The only one who still hugs me like I'm made of something precious." Mr. Lawson nodded and began making notes. "And your son? He will receive a fixed amount. Enough to say I remembered him." I said it calmly. Without anger. Without bitterness. Just clarity. Because here's what Claire never understood when she dropped that box into the trash. Inheritance is not automatic. Respect determines legacy. And she had just disqualified herself from ever touching mine. When I returned home that evening, Claire was hosting a small brunch planning session with her friends. I walked through the living room quietly, and I heard one of them say, Girl, you were savage last night. Claire laughed again. She'll get over it. Old people are sensitive. Old people. Sensitive. I kept walking. But something inside me had shifted permanently. She thought the party ended when the candles went out. She thought the moment was over. But that moment was just the opening chapter. Because humiliation in public deserves correction in public. And I am not done. Not even close. She threw away my tiny gift. Soon, she will learn how it feels when something she expects disappears. And when that happens, there won't be any laughter. Revenge, if done properly, does not begin with confrontation. It begins with silence. After revising my will, I made a very deliberate decision. I would act exactly the same. I would not argue. I would not mention the ring. I would not hint at what I had done. I would let Claire feel safe. And nothing is more dangerous than a woman who feels safe while she is being watched. For the next 2 weeks, I became agreeable. Softer than usual. I complimented her table settings. I thanked her for organizing the pantry. I even offered to help her plan Daniel's upcoming promotion dinner. She relaxed visibly. One evening, while she rearranged the living room decor, she said casually, "I'm glad we're in a better place." I didn't want tension. Neither did I. But tension isn't the same thing as consequences. Daniel, sweet but spineless Daniel, seemed relieved too. He started sitting closer to me at dinner, asking if I needed anything. Guilt is a quiet thing in a grown man. It shows up in over-politeness. But Claire? She mistook my calmness for surrender. And that was her mistake. One Saturday afternoon, she invited a few of her friends over again. Light charcuterie, sparkling wine, casual luxury, the kind that tries very hard to look effortless. I stayed upstairs at first, listening to their voices drift through the house. "She's fine now," Claire said at one point. "You just have to manage older people gently." Manage. I almost laughed out loud. After about 30 minutes, I came downstairs carrying a small leather folder. "Ladies," I said pleasantly, stepping into the living room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Claire's smile tightened immediately. "Not at all." I sat in the armchair opposite her and folded my hands. "I actually wanted to share something exciting," I continued. "I've finalized my estate arrangements." Her friend Amanda perked up. "Oh wow, that's smart planning." Claire's eyes flickered. Estate arrangements. She hadn't known I'd already taken action. "Yes," I nodded. "At my age, it's important to be organized." Claire forced a laugh. "Of course. We've been encouraging that." "Encouraging. That's right." I agreed gently. "Which is why I've placed the house and my primary assets into a protected trust." Silence. You could almost hear the room recalibrate. Claire blinked. "A trust?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It ensures the property goes exactly where I intend." "And where is that?" she asked too quickly. I smiled. "To my granddaughter, Emily." It landed like a glass shattering in slow motion. Amanda shifted in her seat. Another friend stopped mid-sip. Claire's posture changed almost imperceptibly. Her spine straightened, her jaw set. "Well," she said carefully, "that's generous." "It's intentional," I replied. Daniel wasn't home. He had no idea this conversation was happening. And that was also intentional. Claire crossed her legs. "I just assumed Daniel would handle things when the time comes." "I'm sure you did," I said softly. The air turned thin. She tried to recover. "I mean, obviously it's your decision." "Obviously." I leaned back slightly. "You know, Claire, I've been thinking a lot about that birthday party." Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. "I realized something very important that night." "Oh," she said, her tone brittle. "Yes. I realized that people reveal how they value you when they believe there are no consequences." The room had gone completely silent now. "I may be older," I continued evenly, "but I am not invisible. And I am certainly not small." Her cheeks flushed. "Margaret, I think you're misinterpreting." "No." I interrupta gently. "I'm interpreting perfectly." Amanda stood up awkwardly. "Maybe we should." "It's all right," I said. "This is a family matter." Claire's composure was cracking now, but she refused to let it break fully. You're overreacting about a joke, she said. A joke, I repeated, is something both people laugh at. No one laughed. I reached into the leather folder and removed a copy of the appraisal for the ring. I retrieved the gift from the trash the next morning, I said calmly. It was a 1-carat antique diamond, appraised at $12,000. Claire went pale. Amanda gasped softly. I didn't tell you that before. I continued. Because the money was never the point. The point was respect. Claire's lips parted but no words came out. You threw away something valuable because it looked small, I said. And that told me everything I needed to know. I stood slowly. Enjoy your afternoon, ladies. And I walked out of the room. No raised voice. No tears. Just facts. Later that evening, Daniel came home to a storm. Claire confronted him immediately. You knew, she demanded. Knew what? He asked. The ring. The trust. Everything. I stayed upstairs and let the tension build. Because this wasn't about screaming. This was about shift. Power had shifted. And Claire felt it. But this was only the first lesson. She still believed this was about money. She still didn't understand. I don't want her embarrassed. I want her humbled. And humility requires something deeper than financial loss. It requires public understanding. And soon, she will stand in a room full of people again. Only next time, the laughter won't be hers. Claire chose the restaurant herself. Of course she did. It was one of those upscale American steakhouses in downtown Scottsdale, low lighting, leather booths, waiters who recite specials like poetry, and wine bottles that cost more than some people's mortgages. Daniel's promotion dinner. Senior partner. A big night. She planned it like a coronation. Private dining room. Custom menu cards. Gold-accented place settings. Even a small speech prepared on her phone. And she invited everyone. Daniel's firm partners. Their wives. 2 investors. Her closest friends. Even our neighbors. And me. I knew exactly why she invited me. Image. The supportive mother. The united family. The picture of stability. What she didn't know was that I had already decided this would be the night the lesson finished. I arrived early. Not in my usual cardigan. I wore black. Simple. Elegant. Tailored. My late husband always said black made me look formidable. Claire noticed immediately. Wow, she said, scanning me up and down. You look different. I feel different, I replied calmly. The room filled quickly. Laughter, handshakes, congratulations. Daniel looked proud. Nervous but proud. I was proud of him too. That was the tragedy in all of this. My love for my son never disappeared. It was simply standing in the shadow of his wife. Dinner began. Toasts were made. Wine flowed. Then Claire stood up. She tapped her glass gently. If I could just say something. Of course. She launched into a polished speech about Daniel's hard work, late nights, sacrifices. She praised his dedication. His ambition. She mentioned how they were building a future together. Then she smiled brightly and added, and of course, we're so grateful for family support. It takes a village, right? Her eyes flicked toward me briefly. Performative gratitude. Polite applause followed. And that's when I stood. No glass tapping. No annoncement. Just stood. The room quieted automatically. Age does that. Presence does that. May I add something? I asked. Daniel looked surprised. Claire looked cautious. Of course, Daniel said quickly. I held a small envelope in my hand. I'm very proud of my son, I began. My voice was steady, warm, controlled. I raised him to work hard. To build something meaningful. And tonight proves he did exactly that. Daniel smiled, relieved. But, I continued gently, success is not only measured in titles and income. Claire's smile froze slightly. It's also measured in character. In how we treat people when there's nothing to gain. The air shifted. I learned something important recently, I said. Sometimes we mistake small things for insignificant things. Claire's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Sometimes we think if something looks modest, it must not be valuable. A few guests glanced at each other. I removed the diamond ring from my purse. The lighting caught it instantly. Gasps. Real ones. 2 weeks ago, I continued calmly. I gave this ring as a birthday gift. It belonged to my mother. It's an antique European cut diamond. Claire went completely still. I watched it get thrown into the trash in front of guests. The room fell into stunned silence. Daniel's face drained of color. Claire tried to speak. Margaret, this is not. I raised my hand gently. I didn't mention it then because dignity doesn't argue in public. But tonight, since we're celebrating achievement, I thought it appropriate to mention what real value looks like. You could feel the tension pressing against the walls. It's appraised at $12,000, I said softly. But its worth to me is much greater. Claire's composure shattered visibly now. You're twisting this. No, I said evenly. I'm clarifying. I turned toward the room. I retrieved it from the garbage the next morning. There it was. Humiliation. But not loud. Not cruel. Just undeniable. One of the partners cleared his throat awkwardly. Someone set down a fork too hard. Daniel finally spoke. Claire, you threw it away? Her eyes darted to him. I didn't know. You didn't look, I replied quietly. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Then I did something she never saw coming. I walked around the table. And instead of handing the ring to Claire, I placed it in Daniel's hand. This was meant to stay in the family, I said gently. But I've decided it will skip a generation. I turned toward my granddaughter, Emily, who sat wide-eyed at the end of the table. When you're ready one day, I told her softly, this will be yours. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Daniel stared at the ring like it had burned him. Claire sat frozen. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no control over the room. No laughter. No clever recovery. Just witnesses. I returned to my seat. We're here to celebrate, I said calmly. And I truly am proud. Dinner resumed, but it was different now. Conversations were strained. Politeness was fragile. Claire barely spoke the rest of the evening. When we left, she walked ahead of us to the parking lot. Fussed. Silent. Daniel stopped me before getting into his car. Mom, he whispered, shaken. Why didn't you tell me? I just did, I replied gently. He looked toward Claire's rigid silhouette in the passenger seat. I didn't know she. I know, I said. And I meant it. That was the deepest part of the pain. He truly hadn't known. But now he did. As I drove home alone under the desert night sky, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt balanced. Because humiliation had been met with truth. Publicly. But this still wasn't the end. Claire had been embarrassed. But she had not yet understood consequence. And consequence is coming next. Morning after the promotion dinner. The house was quieter than I had ever heard it. Not peaceful. Tense. Daniel left early for work without eating breakfast. I heard the front door close before sunrise. Claire came downstairs an hour later, but she did not greet me. She avoided eye contact. That was new. For years, she had moved through this house like she owned the air inside it. Confident. Polished. Always just slightly superior. But humiliation changes posture. She poured her green juice and stood at the kitchen island, staring at her phone. I could see the notifications lighting up her screen. Text messages. Group chats. Probably from the same women who had been at dinner. People talk. Especially in certain social circles. Especially when money and status are involved. Especially when someone misjudges value in front of investors. She finally spoke, her voice tight but controlled. You blindsided me. I folded the newspaper calmly. No. I corrected a misunderstanding. Her jaw flexed. You made me look stupid. You did that yourself, I replied gently. That stung her more than shouting ever could. She inhaled sharply. You could have handled that privately. And you could have opened the gift privately, I said. Silence. Heavy. She had no answer for that. What Claire didn't understand yet was that the dinner had done more than embarrass her. It had shifted how people saw her. Daniel's senior partners had watched her dismiss a family heirloom because it didn't look impressive enough. Investors had seen her panic. Her friends had seen her lose control of a room she normally dominated. And the women in those circles? They do not forget weakness. By mid-afternoon, the first consequence arrived. Daniel came home early. Not triumphant. Not celebrating. Worried. I had 3 separate conversations today, he said quietly, sitting at the dining table. About last night. Claire froze. One of the partners asked if everything was stable at home, he continued. Another made a joke about checking the trash before tossing assets. Claire's face went pale. Reputation. That's what this was about for her. And reputation had cracked. It was a misunderstanding, she insisted quickly. You know that. Daniel didn't respond immediately. For the first time in their marriage, I saw doubt in his eyes when he looked at her. Not anger. Doubt. That's far more dangerous. Because doubt grows. That evening, Claire received a call from Amanda. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the walls in this house carry sound. I just think you misread the room, Amanda said through the speaker. It came off harsh. Harsh. Not funny. Not bold. Harsh. After she hung up, Claire sat alone in the living room staring at nothing for nearly 20 minutes. That's when she finally began to understand. This wasn't about a ring. It was about how quickly perception can change. 2 weeks ago, she was the polished, strategic wife of a rising executive. Now, she was the woman who threw away a diamond because it didn't look big enough. And worse, the woman who tried to push her elderly mother-in-law out of her own home. People put pieces together. Especially wealthy people. Especially cautious ones. The second consequence came 3 days later. Daniel asked her something he had never asked before. Did you really think my mom was small? The question hung in the air like smoke. Claire opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to soften her tone. I just think she's emotional. Sensitive. Daniel didn't nod this time. He just looked tired. I don't want people thinking we take advantage of her, he said quietly. We. Not she. We. And that's when Claire realized something much bigger than social embarrassment had shifted. Trust. Daniel's unquestioned alignment with her had cracked. Just slightly. But enough. That night, I sat on my balcony upstairs and watched the desert sky turn pink and gold. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Because I never wanted to destroy her. I wanted her to understand. There's a difference. A week passed. Then 2. And slowly, Claire began doing something she had never done before. She tried. She asked if I needed help carrying groceries. She brought me tea without being asked. She referred to me as Mom once at dinner. It sounded unnatural in her mouth. But it was there. Fear can create politeness. But respect? Respect has to be earned back. One evening, she came upstairs to my room. Knocked. Waited. Another new behavior. I didn't know about the ring, she said quietly. I know, I replied. I didn't think it mattered. I looked at her for a long moment. That's the problem, I said softly. You didn't think I mattered. Her eyes flickered. And for the first time, I didn't see arrogance. I saw something fragile. Realization. Because here is the truth she finally understood. The house was never what she lost. The money was never what she risked. She lost control. She lost certainty. And she almost lost her husband's blind loyalty. All because she laughed at something small. And now she was standing very carefully in a house that was legally, structurally, and emotionally no longer within her reach. But this story is not over. Because forgiveness is not automatic. And trust, once cracked, requires proof. Claire has begun trying to repair what she broke. The shift in Claire did not happen overnight, and it certainly did not happen gracefully. At first, her kindness felt rehearsed, like someone reading from a script they barely believed in. She began lingering in rooms I was in, offering help that I had never needed before. She asked about my doctor's appointments. She commented on the roses in the garden that I had planted years ago. On the surface, it looked like growth. But I have lived long enough to recognize the difference between fear-driven politeness and genuine humility. Fear moves quickly. Humility moves slowly. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the dinner, I was organizing old photo albums in the den when Claire quietly sat across from me. She didn't bring her phone. That alone caught my attention. She picked up one of the photographs, Daniel at age 10, holding a science fair trophy almost bigger than his torso. He talks about this day sometimes, she said softly. There was no performance in her voice. No audience. Just us. I studied her carefully. He worked very hard on that project, I replied. He was proud of building something himself. Claire nodded, tracing the edge of the photo. I think. I've been too focused on appearances, she admitted. The words did not come easily. I could see her swallowing her pride with each syllable. That was the first time she spoke without defending herself. A few days later, she did something I did not expect. She invited Emily over for a girls' afternoon. Normally, Claire's idea of bonding involved curated outings and social media moments. But this time they stayed home. They baked from scratch. I could hear flour-covered laughter coming from the kitchen. At one point, Emily ran upstairs to show me a slightly misshapen cake layer and whispered, "Grandma, Mom said we're practicing doing things that matter, not things that look perfect." I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight. But the true test came quietly on a Sunday evening. Daniel had stepped out to pick up dinner, and Claire approached me in the living room carrying a small wooden box. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designer. It was simple oak, polished but modest. She placed it on the coffee table between us and sat down. "I went to see your jeweler," she said carefully. I did not react immediately. "I asked him about the ring," she continued. "Not the price. The history. That mattered. He told me about your mother. About how she brought it with her when she moved across the country after the war. About how it survived more than I've ever had to survive." Her voice trembled slightly. I threw that away without even looking at it. The room was still. She opened the wooden box. Inside was a handwritten letter. Not typed. Not printed. Written. "I can't undo what I did," she said quietly. "But I can acknowledge it properly." She slid the letter toward me. In it, she had written an apology, not vague, not defensive. Specific. She described exactly what she had done, why it was cruel, and how it reflected her own insecurity rather than my worth. She admitted she had been obsessed with appearing elevated, curated, impressive. She admitted she had treated sentiment like clutter. She admitted she had confused size with significance. And then she wrote something that made me pause. "I don't want to inherit your house if I cannot inherit your strength." That sentence did not feel strategic. It felt honest. I looked up at her. There were no tears for display. Just steady eye contact and vulnerability. She had never allowed herself before. "Why now?" I asked gently. She exhaled slowly. "Because I realized something worse than losing the house," she said. "I realized Emily was watching me. And if she ever treated me the way I treated you, I would break." That was the moment I believed her. Growth that comes from reputation damage fades. Growth that comes from imagining your own humiliation. That stays. Weeks passed after that conversation, and the change did not disappear. It deepened. She stopped correcting the way I folded towels. She began asking about my childhood. Not to fill silence, but to understand it. When friends made careless jokes about aging, she didn't laugh anymore. She redirected the conversation. Quietly. Firmly. One evening, as we sat on the patio watching the sunset spill orange across the desert sky, she spoke again. "I used to think power was controlling how people saw you," she said thoughtfully. "Now I think power is being secure enough not to care." I didn't answer right away. I simply watched the sky fade. "You learned that the hard way," I said eventually. She nodded. I did. There was no dramatic reconciliation. No grand forgiveness ceremony. Just time. Consistency. Effort. Respect is not rebuilt with one apology. It is rebuilt with behavior. And slowly, Claire began behaving like someone who understood that small things are never small when they carry someone's heart inside them. The ring remains with Daniel for now, locked safely away until Emily is older. Not as leverage anymore. Not as proof. But as a reminder. Because sometimes revenge is not about destruction. Sometimes the deepest lesson is allowing someone to see exactly who they were, and giving them the space to choose who they want to become instead. And Claire chose. But life has a way of testing choices when you least expect it. And soon another moment will arrive. One that will reveal whether this transformation is permanent or simply convenient. Change is easy when the house is quiet. It is much harder when the world is watching again. For a while, Claire's transformation held steady. She no longer corrected my stories at dinner. She no longer introduced me to her friends as Daniel's mom, in that polished, distancing tone. She began saying our family, instead of my home. Small shifts but meaningful ones. I observed everything without commenting, because real character reveals itself in repetition, not performance. Then autumn arrived, and with it came the charity gala. Claire lives for events like that. Black tie fundraisers, auction paddles, photographers near the entrance, the low hum of wealthy generosity wrapped in expensive fabric. This particular gala supported a children's education foundation, and Daniel's firm had sponsored one of the major tables. Attendance wasn't optional. The last time we had been in a room like that together, she had laughed while my gift sat in a trash can. This time, she asked me what I planned to wear. That question alone carried weight. The night of the gala, she helped fasten the clasp of my pearl necklace. Her hands were steady. "You look beautiful," she said quietly. There was no audience in the bedroom. No one to impress. I studied her reflection in the mirror. She looked elegant as always, but softer around the edges. At the venue, the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and camera flashes. Conversations floated through the air about investments, philanthropy, expansion plans. The kind of room where image is currency. We were seated near the front. Midway through the evening, the foundation director approached our table unexpectedly. "We'd like to recognize a special contribution tonight," she announced into the microphone. "A private donor has funded a full scholarship initiative in honor of intergenerational mentorship." Applause rippled politely. Claire stiffened slightly beside me. I felt it. "And that donor," the director continued warmly, "is Mrs. Margaret Hayes." Every head at the table turned. Claire's eyes widened. I had made the donation quietly weeks earlier. Not to compete. Not to prove anything. Simply because I believe education changes lives. But I had chosen the dedication carefully. Honoring mentorship between grandmothers and granddaughters. I stood slowly as the room applauded. The spotlight found me. In that moment, I remembered the kitchen trash can. The laughter. The word small. I walked to the stage with calm steps. When I reached the microphone, I didn't speak about money. I didn't speak about generosity. "I believe," I said clearly, "that wisdom should never be discarded because it arrives in modest packaging." A gentle murmur moved through the crowd. "I also believe," I continued, "that strength grows when generations listen to one another instead of competing with one another." I didn't look at Claire directly. I didn't need to. When I returned to the table, she was not embarrassed. She was emotional. Her eyes were glossy, but she held herself with composure. During the auction later that evening, something unexpected happened. A designer bracelet came up for bid. Flashy. Noticeable. The kind Claire once would have pursued aggressively for the sake of appearance. The bidding started high. Claire lifted her paddle. Daniel glanced at her, surprised. The numbers climbed quickly. Instead of dropping out when it became impractical, she held her paddle steady. Calm. Determined. Finally, the hammer fell. She won it. But when the item was brought to the table, she didn't fasten it around her wrist. She turned to Emily, who was attending her first formal event, and placed it gently in her lap. "For you," she said softly. "Not because it's big, but because one day you'll understand what matters." Emily looked stunned. So did I. That was not a performative gesture. There were no cameras directly on her. No microphone. Most of the room had already shifted attention back to dessert. She had done it because she wanted to. On the drive home, the car was quiet. Finally, Claire spoke from the front seat. "When they announced your name tonight," she said slowly, "I felt proud. Not threatened. I watched the city lights pass outside the window." "That's growth," I replied gently. She nodded. "I used to measure myself by what I controlled. Tonight I realized, I don't need to control everything to have value." Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. It was subtle, but it was real. Back at the house, Claire paused before going upstairs. "Thank you," she said to me. For what? For not destroying me when you could have. I held her gaze. Humiliation teaches quickly, I said. But dignity teaches permanently. She swallowed and nodded. Later that night, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I reflected on everything that had unfolded over these months. Revenge had been possible. I could have fractured their marriage. I could have tightened the trust conditions further. I could have withdrawn completely and let suspicion rot their foundation. But destruction is easy. Transformation is harder. Claire had been tested publicly once before and failed. Tonight she had been tested again. And she passed. Still, life has a way of presenting one final examination when you believe the lesson is complete. Because true change is not proven in grand ballrooms or dramatic moments. It is proven when no one is watching. And very soon, Claire will face a situation where there is no audience, no spotlight, no social consequence. Only choice. And that choice will tell me everything I need to know. The final test did not arrive in a ballroom. It arrived in a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. 3 weeks after the gala, I slipped on the back patio steps early one morning. It was nothing dramatic, just a misjudged patch of water and a moment of imbalance. But at my age, small falls are never truly small. Daniel insisted on taking me to the hospital, just to be safe. The doctors found a minor hip fracture. Manageable, they said. Surgery required, but routine. Routine. There is no such thing as routine when you are 72 and lying under fluorescent lights listening to machines hum around you. As they prepared me for surgery, I watched Claire from the hospital bed. No makeup. Hair pulled back hastily. She had thrown on the first sweater she could find. She was not composed. She was not curated. She was scared. I'll stay, she told Daniel firmly when he began discussing work calls. Go handle what you need to. I'm not leaving. I studied her carefully. There were no friends here. No social circle. No partners. No polished dining room to manage. Just vulnerability. And inconvenience. Surgery went smoothly, but recovery did not. Pain makes patience thin. Independence disappears overnight. I needed help sitting up. Help walking. Help bathing. Help with the small, undignified mechanics of healing. And that is where the real examination began. Claire rearranged the downstairs guest room, so I wouldn't have to climb stairs. She coordinated with the physical therapist. She learned how to help me stand without hurting my hip. The first time she supported my weight, I felt her arms strain. I've got you, she said quietly. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just steady. One evening, about 10 days into recovery, I woke up disoriented around 2 in the morning. The pain medication left me nauseous and lightheaded. I tried to sit up alone and nearly fell. Before I could call out, Claire was there. She must have been sleeping lightly. She rushed in, kneeling beside the bed. Don't move, she said gently, one hand firm on my shoulder. She brought water. Adjusted pillows. Sat there until my breathing slowed. You don't have to sit up, I murmured. I know, she replied. And she stayed anyway. The next morning I noticed something else. Her Pilates sessions had been cancelled. 2 social lunches rescheduled. A weekend spa trip with Amanda postponed. Not announced. Not complained about. Just quietly set aside. I asked her about it later. You should go, I said. I'll manage with the nurse. She shook her head. I spent a lot of time chasing things that looked important, she said softly. Right now this is important. That sentence held no defensiveness. Only clarity. Days turned into weeks. Physical therapy was slow and frustrating. I hated needing help with tasks I once performed without thought. Pride does not disappear with age. It simply becomes more fragile. One afternoon, while I struggled to button my blouse with trembling fingers, frustration overwhelmed me. I exhaled sharply. I hate this, I admitted. Claire stepped forward quietly and finished the buttons without comment. Then she surprised me. I think this is how you felt that night, she said gently. Standing there. Powerless. I looked at her. Yes, I answered honestly. She nodded slowly. I never understood that kind of vulnerability before. That was it. That was the moment. She was no longer reacting to consequences. She was empathizing with experience. There is a difference. Later that week, Daniel came home with paperwork from his firm. He sat beside my bed and explained that one of the senior partners had made a remark recently, something dismissive about aging leadership, during a strategy meeting. Claire didn't laugh. She didn't stay silent either. I told him, Daniel said carefully, that experience isn't clutter to be thrown out. It's infrastructure. I glanced at Claire. She held my gaze, and in her eyes I saw recognition. She had carried that sentence from the gala into her own life. When I was finally able to walk unassisted across the living room, Claire stood back, watching with folded arms. Not controlling. Not hovering. Just present. You're strong, she said. So are you, I replied. And I meant it. The fall had weakened my body but clarified something else entirely. Transformation is proven in inconvenience, in sacrifice, in sleepless nights when no one applauds you. Claire had been given every opportunity to revert back to comfort and image once the public pressure faded. Instead, she chose consistency. One evening, as I prepared to return upstairs for the first time since the accident, she paused at the bottom of the staircase. I know I can't erase who I was, she said quietly. But I hope one day when Emily tells stories about us, they won't start with the worst version of me. I rested my hand on the banister. Stories evolve, I told her. When people do. For the first time since the birthday party, I felt something that wasn't caution. It was peace. Not because she feared losing inheritance. Not because she feared reputation damage. But because she finally understood that people are not measured by how loudly they shine in public. They are measured by how gently they hold others in private. And now the house feels different. Not because ownership changed, but because respect did. Still, life has one final truth I've learned over decades. Forgiveness is a gift. Trust is a process. And legacy? Legacy is decided by what we teach the next generation when they're watching us most closely. And Emily is always watching. Time does something interesting after a storm passes. It doesn't erase what happened, but it softens the sharpest edges. The house felt different in the months after my recovery, not because the walls had changed, but because the energy inside them had. Claire no longer moved through rooms like she was curating a showroom. She moved like someone aware that history lived there. She asked before replacing things. She listened when I spoke. And most importantly, she stopped measuring value by appearance. But life rarely allows growth to remain untested. It was early spring when the call came. Daniel's firm was restructuring. A major investor had pulled out unexpectedly, and several senior positions were being reconsidered. Daniel wasn't fired, but his new title suddenly felt less secure. Promotions in corporate America are celebrated loudly and reconsidered quietly. The pressure settled over him like a visible weight. I watched the tension build over days. Late-night emails. Short replies. Forced optimism. Claire noticed it too. Old Claire would have panicked about lifestyle adjustments, social perception, what the country club might whisper. Old Claire would have tightened her grip on appearances. But the woman sitting at the kitchen table across from Daniel that week did something different. We'll adjust, she told him calmly one evening. Whatever that means. It doesn't change who you are. He looked at her carefully, as if measuring whether she truly meant it. I might lose the partner track, he said quietly. Then we'll build something else, she replied. Together. No dramatics. No visible fear about losing status. Just steadiness. Later that night, she came upstairs to my room. I used to think security meant control, she admitted. Now I think it means knowing you'll be okay even if control disappears. I nodded slowly. That's a hard lesson to learn before you have to use it. She smiled faintly. I'm still learning. A week later, Daniel received official notice. His advancement would be delayed indefinitely. Not a demotion, but not the trajectory everyone expected either. In their social circle, perception mattered almost as much as reality. The news spread quietly. The same friends who once congratulated them lavishly now responded with polite neutrality. Invitations shifted subtly. Conversations became more cautious. And this time, Claire did not chase validation. When Amanda called and made a thinly veiled comment about timing not always aligning with ambition. Claire didn't defend herself. She didn't overcompensate. She simply said, "We're grateful for what we have." After hanging up, she turned to me and said, "It's strange. I don't feel embarrassed." "Why would you?" I asked gently. "Because we're not at the top anymore," she said honestly. I studied her. "Top of what?" She paused. Then she laughed softly at herself. "Exactly. That weekend, something happened that told me everything I needed to know." Daniel sat with Emily at the dining table helping her with a school project about family heritage. Emily asked about traditions, what gets passed down and why. Claire reached for the old photo album before I could. She flipped to the page with my mother's picture. The same woman whose ring had once been thrown into a trash can. This is your great-great-grandmother, Claire told Emily gently. She carried her life across the country in one suitcase. Some things are small in size but enormous in meaning. Emily listened carefully. "And the ring?" Emily asked. Claire didn't hesitate. "The ring reminds us to look twice before deciding something isn't valuable." There was no shame in her voice now. Only honesty. That night, as I sat alone reflecting, I realized something profound. The greatest revenge I could have taken would have been permanent damage. I had the power to fracture their marriage, to tighten my trust, to create distance that never healed. But revenge that destroys leaves nothing to inherit. What I wanted was correction, not collapse. And correction had taken root. A few days later, Daniel came upstairs with paperwork in his hand. "I spoke to Mr. Lawson," he said carefully, "about the trust." I raised an eyebrow. "I told him I don't want control over anything that isn't mine to earn," he continued. "Whatever you've set up, it's your decision. No expectations." That was new too. No entitlement. No quiete sampchen. Just respect. When he left the room, Claire remained behind. "I don't care about the house anymore," she said softly. "I care about the example." "Which is?" I asked. "That when I'm your age," she replied, "I want the next generation to sit with me because they want to, not because they're waiting for something." There it was. Legacy. Not property. Not jewelry. Character. Weeks later, Daniel began exploring a new opportunity. Smaller firm, less flashy title, but more aligned with his values. Claire encouraged him. Not because it would impress anyone, but because it felt right. The night he signed the new contract, we celebrated at home. Simple dinner. No fetagrefers. No curated speeches. Just family. As I watched Claire laughing gently with Emily in the kitchen, flour dusting both of their sleeves, I thought about that birthday night again. About the trash can. About the laughter. If that moment had never happened, none of this would have either. Sometimes humiliation is the spark that burns away illusion. Sometimes loss clears space for something stronger. Claire once threw away a small box because it didn't look significant. Now she understood that significance is rarely loud. And as I prepare to make one final adjustment, one that will shape everything that comes after me, I know this. The true inheritance was never the house. It was the lesson. And the lesson has finally taken hold. What happens next will define not just Claire, but all of us.